If you want to get stronger in calisthenics, you need to understand the 7 training principles: specificity, overload, fatigue management, SRA or stimulus recovery and adaptation, variation, phase potentiation, and individualization. Let's start with specificity. Specificity says that your training should reflect your goals. If you want to get better at the planche, most of your training should be focused on the planche, not on pull-ups or squats. Just like if you wanted to get better at swimming, most of your training would be focused on swimming, not on playing basketball. Your training may violate this principle only if it's training the underlying systems of that ability. In this case, strengthening the main muscles used, such as front delts. If your training isn't focused on the planche or strengthening your front delts, you're not going to get better at the planche. You're going to get better at the thing you're focusing on. This doesn't mean that if you want to achieve the planche, all of your training should be planche-focused exercises. You should still do some pulling exercises to not develop any imbalances, but the meat and potatoes of your routine should be planche exercises. Specificity is the most important training principle because it determines what you get better at. All the other principles only determine how much better you get. If you think of all the other principles as weapons, specificity is the ability to point them at the target. You can shoot the weapons all you want, but if they're not pointed at the target, you're not going to hit it. The second principle is overload. Overload says that your training has to be hard and getting progressively harder over time. For your training to be classified as hard, it has to be above RPE 7 and your MEV, or minimum effective volume. RPE means rating of perceived exertion, which makes you rate how hard the set was on a scale of 1 to 10, based on how much effort you put into it. The most simple way to grasp it is by using a set of 10 as your max. In this case, hard training would be anything over 7 reps. If you did 4 reps, you would be nowhere close to hard training. That would just be a warm-up. MEV, or minimum effective volume, is the least volume you can do to get stronger. If you did 1 set of push-ups to failure per week, that wouldn't be hard training, even though you went to failure, simply because it was under your MEV. For most people, MEV is around 4 to 12 sets per week, so you have to be in this range and train above RPE 7 to classify your training as hard. And for your training to be getting progressively harder over time, it has to be higher in magnitude than recent training. You can't be doing the same workout over and over, even if it was difficult at first, because as you get stronger, it's simply not challenging anymore. This means that you can't do 10 push-ups in every workout and expect to get stronger. You have to increase the difficulty over time by either doing more reps or adding weight to your body. The third principle is fatigue management. Fatigue management says that since overloading training not only makes you stronger but also tired, you should keep fatigue in check to promote the best gains and reduce injury risk. Too much fatigue can interfere with our ability to overload, which means that we can simply be too tired to do more than last time. It can interfere with adaptations occurring, which means that even if you were somehow able to present an overload, you wouldn't be able to benefit from it because your body would be too fatigued to adapt, and it can also get us hurt or sick. So managing your fatigue is essential if you want to get as strong as possible. But how do you manage your fatigue? There's multiple levels on which you can manage your fatigue. You can rest between your sets, get a good night's sleep every day, take rest days or technique sessions between your overloading sessions, take deloads between your mesocycles, and active rest phases between your macro cycles. To clarify some of the terms I just mentioned, a technique session means a very light session where you just work on technique. A deload means a full week of technique sessions, and an active rest phase means a deload and a week of not doing anything training related. Fatigue isn't something that you should avoid, because the only way to do that would be to not train hard, which violates the principle of overload. There's no overload without fatigue, so it's something that needs to be managed. That's why it's called fatigue management. You simply train hard, and when you feel like your fatigue is getting out of hand, you back off to reduce it. In other words, you take 1 step back so that you can take 3 steps forward. The fourth principle is SRA, or stimulus recovery and adaptation. SRA says that you don't get stronger when training, you get stronger when resting, so you have to train hard to stimulate gains and rest to realize them. This is also called the SRA curve, which shows that stimulus depresses your abilities, recovery gets them back to where they were previously, and adaptation elevates them. This principle is a combination of the previous 2 principles, overload and fatigue management. Overload tells us that we have to train hard, and fatigue management tells us that we need to recover so that we can train hard again. So putting them together means that to get stronger, we have to train hard, recover, and repeat. This is the topic that I went over in my latest video, so if you want to learn more about it, definitely check it out. The fifth principle is variation. Variation says that in order to control the negatives of stale training, occasionally switching up the ways in which you train can make your progress faster. This is due to the fact that as you do the same exercises over long periods of time, training no longer stimulates as much adaptation because adaptive resistance rises in systems, and chances of wear and tear injuries go up significantly. For example, if you do the same variation of pull-ups for a whole year straight, you're most likely not going to make much or any gains in the last few months because your body has adapted to it so much that you would need to do ungodly amounts of volume to progress. Your body thrives on novelty, and even though overload is a form of novelty because you're presenting your body with higher stimulus, at some point even that might not be enough. Your risk of injury also is high because you're damaging the same structures over and over in exactly the same way, which can lead to overuse injuries. You could fatigue manage your way out of them, but by properly using variation, you'd be able to do less fatigue management and progress faster. And the crazy thing is that even a small variation can be enough, simply switching from pronated grip to neutral grip pull-ups. Variation can also come in forms of a change in volume volume, intensity, and frequency. However, keep in mind that variation and specificity come at a trade-off of each other, but since specificity is more important, it should be dominant. This means that you shouldn't switch up your training every week, because then your training would be no longer specific. Gains have a certain momentum, and by switching things up too often, you don't get the chance to accumulate it. Variation should only arise when your gains slow down significantly. In other words, milk it out before you switch. The sixth principle is phase potentiation. Sounds like a fancy word, but don't worry, it's not that complicated. Phase potentiation says that when you want to get better at something, you should build up its base and supporting structures before focusing on it specifically to get the best long-term gains. What this basically means is that one thing done earlier makes the next thing go better. For example, not eating a couple of hours before going to a restaurant potentiates the culinary experience you're going to have at the restaurant. If you go to a restaurant already full, you won't enjoy the food as much as if you were hungry. So not eating before going to a restaurant makes your experience at the restaurant better. For strength training, the main application of this principle is building muscle before building strength. Big muscles potentiate strength training because the bigger a muscle is, the stronger you can make it. I've made this analogy multiple times on this channel, but doing strength training when your muscles are tiny is like trying to pour a gallon of water in a small cup. The cup will fill up, but most of the water will go to waste because the cup is simply too small to hold a gallon of water. A bigger cup would be able to hold more water, just like bigger muscles would be able to benefit more from strength training. This means that if you want to get really strong, you should build some muscle first in the 6 to 12 rep range with compound exercises, and only then strengthen it in lower rep ranges. Another benefit of building muscle before building strength is that you won't lose muscle while training for strength, but you would lose strength if you were to do it the other way around. And the seventh and last principle is individualization. Individualization says that since people are different from one another and from themselves over time, training should be adjusted to account for those differences. People are very different. They differ in their age, limb length, body weight, sex, genetics for adaptation, fatigue management, and staleness onset, and muscle strength relative to one another, which means that two people can have vastly different training programs and still progress fine. Not only that, people differ from themselves over time. Their adaptive resistance goes up, so more overload is needed to continue progressing. Their size and strength changes, so as they become bigger and stronger, they accumulate more fatigue and need to do more fatigue management. And their recovery ability goes up, so they're able to do more volume and still recover from it. All of this means that you can't give everyone a cookie-cutter program and expect them to progress at the same rates. Of course, beginners will progress fine with any program, but as they become more advanced, their training program will have to become more individualized for them to progress the most in the long run. Remember this, as you change, what you require to be your best changes. If 4 years ago you used to do 8 sets of pull-ups per week and progress just fine, you may need to do more now simply because you've grown, and that's okay. It's not like there's anything wrong with you. Your recovery ability and adaptive resistance have risen so much that you just need to do more work to continue making progress. This means that over time, you need to experiment with different volumes, frequencies, intensities to see what makes you progress the most. However, there's a reason why individualization is ranked last on this list. That's because it only modifies all of the other principles. To get strong, you will need to adhere to all the other principles mentioned previously. Individualization just changes the degree to which you do that. You may need more fatigue management and less overload. You may need more variation and less specificity, but that doesn't change the fact that you still need all of them. Now that we've covered all of the training principles, let's talk about how we can actually use them in practice. The first thing that you need to know is that they're not strict rules. They're just guides. You could get to your destination without following them, but it would take a longer time, so following them is a good idea if you want to reach your fitness goals as efficiently as possible. This also means that they're not black and white. It's not like you either follow them or you don't. There are shades of gray in between, so you don't need to be super anal about following them perfectly. Of course, you should follow them as closely as you can, but don't think that by not following them perfectly, you won't make any gains. You will, but you could do better. Another important point is that they're ranked from most important to least important. So if you're a beginner, you only really need to worry about the first 3 principles. The latter principles should be taken into consideration only when the first 3 are well applied and you're no longer a beginner. Otherwise, they will just overwhelm you for not that much benefit. The main use of these principles is as criteria from which to evaluate or create a training program. For example, if it meets specificity really well, you can give it 7 points. If it kinda meets specificity, you can give it 0 points. But if it doesn't meet specificity at all, you can give it -7 points. I chose 7 because there are 7 principles, and the further down the list you go, the less points you can give to each of the principles because they're less important. Overload would get 6 points, fatigue management would get 5, SRA would get 4, variation would get 3, phase potentiation would get 2, and individualization would get 1. In my opinion, this is the best way to evaluate the training program based on the training principles because it takes into account the fact that they're not equally important. If they were, you could just give each of them 1 point, but that's just not the case. To conclude this video, let's summarize all of the training principles to really drill them in your head. Specificity says that your training should reflect your goals. Overload says that your training has to be hard and getting progressively harder over time. Fatigue management says that since overloading training not only makes you stronger but also tired, you should keep fatigue in check to promote the best gains and reduce injury risk. SRA says that you don't get stronger when training, you get stronger when resting. So you have to train hard to stimulate gains and rest to realize them. Variation says that in order to control the negatives of stale training, occasionally switching up the ways in which you train can make your progress faster. Phase potentiation says that when you want to get better at something, you should build up its base and supporting structures before focusing on it specifically to get the best long-term gains. And individualization says that since people are different from one another and from themselves over time, training should be adjusted to account for those differences. I really hope that you found this video helpful because I had a lot of fun making it and learning about these principles. My goal with this channel is to distill advanced strength training concepts into short, easily digestible videos so that I can help you out on your calisthenics journey. And if that's something you would be interested in, make sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss out on any future uploads. You can also check the description for the best 9 bodyweight exercises for beginners and my Instagram, where I post my daily workouts and lifestyle in general. And have an awesome day. Peace!